To the surprise of no one, those proudly socialist indoctrination centers, known as universities, are among the biggest piggies seeking to suckle from the trough of the coronavirus bailout. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness of packing K-12 classrooms at college campuses around the world. Today, we discuss how New York teachers are furious, just furious, with Mayor Bill de Blasio and School Chancellor Richard Carranza for leaving the schools open during the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. Plus, a Yale shrink claims that Donald Trump is mentally unfit for office, but refuses to comment on sleepy Joe Biden, and we deliver some real education in the form of Michelangelo's famous sculpture, Moses. But we start today with the $2 trillion coronavirus relief package and how colleges are bellying up to the bar, literally, to snuffle like truffles in the pork. That's exactly right. Truffle-snuffling liberal universities, you know, the ones that keep lecturing you about socialism, the ones that keep lecturing you about how money's bad and corporations are bad. Well, here they are, wedging themselves up to the trough, bumping out with their big university behinds, bumping out other organizations so they can slop up all that free trillions of dollars of federal money.
So we know that the CARES bill was passed 96-0 in the Senate, and then it was a voice vote in the House, and then President Trump signed it into law so that we have this bill, this big $2 trillion stimulus package. And what does that all mean when it comes to our college students? Well, we know that going back actually earlier in March, the president and Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos had announced that students who are paying off their student debt could actually defer their payments and their interest for up to 60 days. And then in addition, the department had suspended automatic payments for those who are over 31 days, a whole month, delinquent on their payments.
Why are we subsidizing universities that have endowments in the billions of dollars? I could see doing this perhaps from some of your major state universities, provided that they're engaging in really a lot of federally sensitive research. Universities that are trying to come up with a cure for the coronavirus, for instance, universities that are working on creating better ventilators, for instance. But simply to bail out schools is an odd thing to me, especially when you got these Ivy League schools. We're going to see a story later on. $40 billion Harvard is sitting on. Harvard's sitting on an endowment of $40 billion. I just don't understand why we need to be bailing out schools like that. But this is typical, right? These so-called Marxist indoctrination centers, these places that are constantly lecturing us in a social justice fashion, that when bottom line comes down, what are they looking for? They're looking for more money. Mo money.
Mo money. Well, in the specific, the CARES bill, in Section 3513, the bill actually authorizes Secretary DeVos to suspend all loan payments until September 30th, and it suspends all accrual of interest during this suspension. In addition, the bill has suspended all involuntary collection related to the loan for students, including the garnishment of wages or the reduction of tax refunds that would happen if there were delinquent payments. However, as Money.com reports, the suspensions are only good for federally held loans and don't apply to anything private.
Well, why does this just apply to college kids? Why not provide stipends for high school kids? Why not pay high school teachers and middle school teachers, public school teachers? Well, I'm not advocating for this, but why is student loans from college kids more of a priority than keeping public school teachers afloat or finding ways to subsidize distance learning? Why this particular demographic? Why is the progressive left so worried about that one narrow group of debt holders in this country? And I think you understand the reason why. Because they are the college graduates, young, dumb, and full of stupid, right? Those college graduates, that 18 to 25-year-old demographic who just recently graduated from college or is going to college now, saddled with $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, they are prime pickings for the Democrat Party, right? They already went to public schools, right? From the time they were in kindergarten through high school, got all that left-wing indoctrination. Now they're in or graduating from major liberal progressive centers, universities. They've got all this debt that they've been told repeatedly isn't their fault by their teachers. All their teachers have been telling them that they should have gotten this education for free. This is the prime demographic for progressive politics, which is why the focus, even when you've got a so-called Republican president and Republican control of the Senate, you really begin to see what how progressive measures know no party, right? The big government buyouts, the big government programming and planning, the globalist aspects of all of this. It almost doesn't matter whether you got an R or a D from in front of your name these days.
That's true. So I can't hold my feet up, but you could just change the whole rhyme to this little piggy went to college. This little piggy has $100,000 in debt. This little piggy, you could go on.
This little piggy pretends to be a Marxist. This little piggy demands not to have to pay, right? Meanwhile, how much hypocrisy have we seen from these people moving forward? And the thing that gets me about the universities, they're absolutely shameless in this, right? That we have to have this money, we have to have all of these programs. I think what the American public are seeing is it really that difficult for your kid to be sitting in the rec room of your house or sitting in your basement, getting full college classes and full credit? Is it really that? Do they really need the dorms and the meal plans? Do they really need all the left-wing experimentation on campus with all the clubs and social activities? Do you really need it?
You don't need it, but hey, now we're thinking because of the coronavirus, it might actually be easier for these kids to get into these lovely top colleges, especially not even just the lowly, community college. They're going to be able to get into the top colleges as well.
Well, this is an important story because, not to the surprise of nobody, now that you've got kids not able to sign up for college, we've canceled half a semester more or less. It's not even 100% sure there'll be a semester in the fall. And so guess what's happening? With the market, the pool of available college kids begins to shrink. The so-called tough universities begin to radically lower their standards because, again, they don't want the best and brightest. They want the money, right?
Money, money, money. It's always the money. We do have a story coming out of New York City when we're taking a look now at not our college kids, but our K through 12, where New York City, we have known over the past week here, has become a hotspot for the coronavirus. And last week, Mayor Bill de Blasio and the school chancellor, Richard Carranza, basically are being told that they have blood on their hands. This is a quote from a teacher. The teachers, the administrators all across New York City are outraged because what happened at the beginning of this whole pandemic was the schools were left open, even though multiple teachers in multiple schools actually tested positive for coronavirus.
And what gets me is that, look, this blame game it's the chicken and the egg, right? I mean, who really is responsible?
So many farm references today. I'm loving it.
EIEIO. Right. So this is an EIEIO day. But it's when you think about pork, right?
Pork,
when you think about that, you think about troughs.
Yes.
Right. You think about cows.
Moo.
Right. And so, in any event, if you excuse our farm language today, the fact is that it's a chicken and an egg game, right? I mean, did Trump do everything he should have, right? No, of course not. How could he have? This is an absolutely unprecedented situation. Did the Chinese government do everything they could have? Absolutely not. Even though the American media pretends like every lie the Chinese tell you is somehow absolute truth, and if you question it, you're a xenophobic racist. A story we will see later as well. And so the bottom line is that nobody could have handled this correctly. But what gets me is people like de Blasio, right, and Cuomo, the governor of New York, who've been ripping Donald Trump or Nancy Pelosi, who have been ripping Donald Trump no matter what he does. If he acts fast, he's not stopping to think. If he stops and thinks, he's letting people die. And you think about where was Congress when the Wuhan virus hit? They were going through a fake impeachment, right?
Yeah.
Right? They were spending Nancy and the boys weren't worried about the virus. They were worried about going after Trump. De Blasio and Cuomo have been all over Donald Trump for whatever goes wrong is his fault. And yet we find out that it is de Blasio, it is Cuomo. We know that New York City was radically underprepared. De Blasio had rejected ventilators, had rejected certain kinds of medical supplies years ago, that you have a situation in New York where they kept the kids in school way longer than they should have, right? And so it's fine. If you're going to blame Trump for all this, then the blame on you is elevated much higher. Go to Louisiana, where they're now the mayor of New Orleans and the governor of Louisiana are blaming Donald Trump for not canceling Mardi Gras. That the mayor of the city, New Orleans, and the governor of the state couldn't be bothered to actually govern and make a decision. No. And what would have happened, do you think, Katie, if Donald Trump preemptorily had canceled Mardi Gras.
No, we know it would have been his fault.
Right.
Of
and
course it would have
how
been.
much
And
money
he
would
have
he been taking away from primarily black people in New Orleans, right?
Yeah.
How much
Somehow
money?
it's a racist move.
Well, you can't win with this stuff. And I get that, so I don't want to just turn around and do what the other group, what the left is doing, but it has to be pointed out here, right, that this is a leftist gambit. If you're going to do this, you better make sure your hands are clean. And guess what? It is absolutely impossible for anyone's hands, if we use viral metaphors here, to be completely germ-free when it comes to dropping the ball on this, because it came out of left field.
And out of left field, they a lot of people, some of these administrators, they nicknamed this the Carranza virus.
Now, don't get me started. We've talked about Carranza, the superintendent of the public schools in New York, a lot. And this guy is a pig, if I may continue my farm metaphors. He's just a pig. He's nasty. He's virulently racist. He is somebody who is absolutely committed to lower educational standards if it makes low-performing kids seem not as bad as they otherwise would. He's destroying single-handedly many aspects of New York City schools. He's destroying many aspects, those few aspects, I should say, of New York public schools that actually worked in the name of inclusion, in the name of diversity, pulling it all apart.
And you want a specific example related with the coronavirus, they actually, at Grace Dodge High School, it's a campus in the Bronx where AOC reigns, a teacher actually self-reported a positive COVID-19 test on Thursday, March 12th, according to the staffers. The Department of Education did not close the school the next day when kids still attended before de Blasio announced that all schools would be closing starting on March 16th. Teachers received a form letter from Carranza confirming that a staffer had tested positive, but they said that the building was disinfected and school was not closed while the teachers actually still worked there last week.
And hence they call it the Carranza virus.
That Carranza.
No, I mean, while everybody to some degree could not anticipate everything, it does seem like New York and California, for that matter as well, the two real epicenters of the disease in this country. It does seem like they've dropped the ball in much larger ways, and which is ironic to me because you had Cuomo come out, right? The way he'll go after Trump for things that Trump couldn't possibly have done differently, and they'll defend themselves. Remember what Cuomo said? The reason New York is hit so hard is because we welcome people. Yeah. Unlike you evil
diverse.
flyover people who don't let anybody cross your borders. We're welcoming. And so the reason we're suffering is because we've been so kind to people. Isn't it nice the way you could pat yourself, throw a shoulder blade out, reaching around to pat yourself on the back?
Well, you know what they're doing? They're making hay while the sun shines.
Oh, there you go.
All right. Well, we know that President Trump is mentally unfit for office, according to the Yale shrink psychiatrist, Bandy Lee. She's been talking for months now, multiple times, saying how unfit President Trump is to be president, and yet she refuses to diagnose the one, the only Joseph Sleepy Joe Biden. We have heard multiple times about President Trump, and she actually, if you remember, wanted to put a 72-hour hold on President Trump after the military strike that was against Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. But in a Washington Monthly article titled "The Disinformation Campaign Being Launched Against Biden," Nancy Letourneau writes, "There is no data to support the allegation that Biden is in cognitive decline." And in the same article, Lee, again, the one who keeps calling Trump mentally unfit, said, "I do not diagnose without examination and do not speak about public figures in general unless there is evidence of such profound danger to public health and well-being because of serious signs of mental instability in a public servant that it would be a public disservice not to share the knowledge and training that I have." Biden has not risen to this threshold.
Right. So basically, Donald Trump's the only one in politics, not Nancy Pelosi, who slurs her words like a drunken sailor on leave night. And a dozen other politicians you could point to who are having serious cognitive dissonance here. No. The only public figure she's ever been able to diagnose comfortably is Donald Trump. And we've done that show a couple of times. We talked about how this quote-unquote psychiatrist
at Yale
has diagnosed Trump for being mentally ill, for being a sick old, decrepit white man who needs to be 72 hours, put a hold on him before he's allowed to. She had no problem with that. with what you've seen from Joe Biden, though, right? The inability to determine his wife from his daughter, not knowing where he is, a lot of similarities with what's going on with him and Nancy Pelosi in terms of the slurring of words, the deer in the headlights look, the awkward pauses where they forget what they were talking about. But this psychiatrist doesn't feel qualified to give a diagnosis on Democrat politicians.
Without examination.
Without examining.
Must
right? But with Trump, it's just so obvious. Oh, and by the way, the Soleimani strike, that's when she really lost it, right? According to her, because Donald Trump engaged in that operation that killed one of the most notorious terrorists in the world, she lost her stuff and blamed that and all the fallout that was going to come from that on Trump. And guess what? What's the fallout? Soleimani's dead. The Americans won, and everything these liberal idiots like the psychologists have predicted, none of it came true.
Hail to the chief.
So all right. So maybe somebody needs to diagnose her. Can we do that?
Maybe.
In line with our barnyard metaphors, she's a clucking hen. Right?
Cluck, cluck.
She's a clucking hen.
Cluck, cluck.
She's Goosey Lucy running around. Loosey-goosey?
Loosey-goosey.
Goosey Lucy. Loosey-goosey. She's loosey-goosey, strutting around. The Trumpian sky is falling.
I'm strutting over here.
Strut, strut, strut.
All right.
Isn't that a Sheena Easton song from the 1980s, Strut? Strut, pow, put it out. That's what you want for women. Remember that one?
I do not.
You weren't even born yet.
In the 80s,
probably,
but I didn't hear it in the womb. Sorry.
You're out there and you want a golden oldie to listen to. Sheena Easton, Strut. Women's empowerment from 1983, 3-ish. I'm guessing here.
Clearly you're guessing.
I'm guessing.
And now it's time for some real education.
Yes, and this is one of our happiest segments that we do here. It's a completely barnyard free, by the way, where we take 5-7 minutes and we talk about a classic of world culture, Western culture in particular, or do a little home educating for you. Education is in a bad state in America. There's no way you can pretend it's not. From pre-K all the way through graduate programs, there's a lot that is messed up and wrong and just wrong-headed and dangerous. So the show oftentimes, like any news show, right? If everything was going great, we'd be out of business. We'd love it, but it doesn't work that way. So this gives us a chance to show how lovely education can be.
Today we are talking about a man who may have 4 names, but he goes by one, Michelangelo. And he's likely most known for his painting of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome, completed in 1512. But Michelangelo would rather be known for his sculpture work, including his sculpture of David, which he finished in 1505, or even his sculpture of Moses, which is the centerpiece of the tomb of Pope Julius II, located in the church of San Pietro in Vincoli, which is in Rome. And for 40 years, with many interruptions, Michelangelo worked on 40 different statues it was supposed to complete this tomb, and yet it didn't happen. It didn't get to happen in the 5 years that it was supposed to be completed. It didn't happen in the 40 years. But the Moses was completed in 1515, and that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and to me, this sculpture, like the David, which is perhaps more famous. Show the picture, Mike. This statue, to me, it is, if you had one picture outside of Michelangelo's David to talk about what the Renaissance actually was, it would be this picture, it seems to me. And as we know, Michelangelo really didn't like painting. As a young boy, he just despised it, which is ironic, of course, because it was this Pope Julius, who initially forced Michelangelo to get up on that scaffold way at the top of the Sistine Chapel and do all of that painting on his back, with all of that paint falling back into his beard and his hair. But it was a sculpture. It was a sculptor that sculpture that Michelangelo absolutely asserted as his primary gift. And there has been, not since the time of the ancients, right? There has been no sculptor like Michelangelo in the history of Western culture. And so go to the statue of Moses again. Why do I think this is a summary statement about what the Renaissance is? First of all, take a look at Michelangelo. Michelangelo's Moses. Note how absolutely brilliant the sculpture is. Notice how the muscles, the veins and muscles of that left arm as it comes across the lap. Notice how the beard, the absolute intricacy of the locks of the beard. You can see the musculature of the man underneath his tunic there, his cloak. And the intensity of the image, right? So this is classical Greek sculpture. No one for about 2,000 years had been able to sculpt bodies this way. Notice the familiarity with anatomy. We know for a fact that Michelangelo used to beg bodies of the local churches, dead bodies, and he would take them back to his room and dissect them. And he would dissect them sometimes in his own bedroom. And we have actually reports of police actions, right, where people went to the cops and complained that there was a stench coming from Michelangelo's room. And of course, that was because he'd bring corpses back and he wouldn't quite finish the job in time. And so they didn't have refrigerators back then. But it was this study of anatomy that Michelangelo was doing in a very graphic way that allowed him to understand how the bones and muscles worked. So you see what Michelangelo's doing. He's going back to the classical Greek and Roman world to bring back the physical realities of the human form. But he subordinates that beautiful anatomical truth to a greater spiritual truth. This is where the Christian Renaissance appropriates the Greek and Roman, right? And then turns it into something that's no longer pagan. We go back to the picture of Moses and you see the intensity of the eyes. You see the spiritual purpose. Here is the man. He's got one of the tablets of the Decalogue under his arm, the commandments, right? Here is a man that has been commissioned by God. This is one of the prophets that stood in the presence of God on top of the mountain, right? At one point, Moses actually had to wear a veil when he came down from the mountain after talking with God, because his contact with the Almighty irradiated him. It turned him into a glowing creature that freaked the Israelites out. So he took to wearing a veil. And what do I mean when I say Renaissance? That physical, that commitment to portraying physical realities the way they are, that comes from the Greek and Roman world, with that higher spiritual dimension that you get that supersedes the mere physicality of the statue and shows you the spiritual person of God's primary prophet in the Old Testament. And by the way, if you get a chance to go back and look at the David image, you could make the exact same argument, right? The young shepherd boy who, the minute he takes on God's cause to fight Goliath, the shepherd boy becomes something much greater than a shepherd boy. And you see that in the still boyish, yet incredibly perfected physique of David. And you see it in those two statues.
A fun fact about David is that Michelangelo wasn't actually the first man to be commissioned to make that statue. He was down the line, and it took him and his genius to be able to actually finish it to his liking, although he had to go back and fix a nose. So that's kind of the famous little David tidbit that I like to talk about. But when you look at Moses here, what's so profound to me is the fact that there were supposed to be 40 statues for this tomb for Pope Julius II. And obviously, Michelangelo was a perfectionist when it came to his sculpture. He wanted it to be just right. He didn't care as much about the painting, like you said, but he wanted to make sure that Moses was complete. Moses is the centerpiece. And as you look at the Bible, Moses is a centerpiece moving forward with it. And the profoundness of this sculpture, I don't think any of us would actually understand it unless we were able to stand in front of it in real person to really get a grasp of, whoa, what did this guy do in the 16th century? We take for granted, I think, most of the art that we have because we think, oh, I could do that if I wanted to. But these people are working hundreds and hundreds of years ago when they don't have the tools like we do, and they didn't have that inspiration. It all had to come from within. And it's so much more profound than what we can produce today.
Go back to the picture. You know, painters have it, as amazing as painters are, they have it easy, right?
Compared to
color and a canvas,
exactly.
Right? You're working in two dimensions, basically. Can you imagine what was at the time just a huge block of Carrara marble, right? Just a huge, solid but fragile, because not only is marble hard, but when you cut into it and you drill into it and you hammer into it, it flakes and it falls apart. Something that is that hard and solid, and out of a solid block of marble to sculpt something like that in 3 dimensions, it's actually said that Michelangelo would make wax models of his sculptures before he did them, and then he would put the sculpture underwater and begin to raise it a couple of inches at a time. So as the head of the Moses came up out of the water, he would start there in the block and bring more and more of it out of the water and then go ahead backwards and carve it. Staggering accomplishment. And it's also, I think, really fitting to when you point out that it was Pope Julius who was a typical Renaissance pope. He was a warrior, he was a soldier, he was a ladies' man, he was a lot of things besides being the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. He was one of those secular Renaissance popes who gave rise to the Reformation, right? The changing of the church. And it's interesting that Michelangelo was constantly at odds with Julius. Julius was demanding he do things like build his own tomb and then trying everything he could to not do it, right? So it is really fitting that the humanist, not the Pope, wins this, right? Michelangelo wins, not the Pope. Michelangelo was able to carve the statues he wanted, but never did finish the tomb of Julius. And that shows you how the corrupt Renaissance Pope ultimately did not have the last laugh.
All right, that's going to do it for this Monday show. If you like the show, please help us keep others educated by liking and sharing this episode with your family and friends on all of the platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Parler. And if you're a fan of the audio podcast, please consider giving it a 5-star review and leave us a nice little comment to keep us moving up in the rankings.
And just a quick reminder, there are millions and millions and millions of public school kids who are turned out of their schools now, who are locked out with very little moving forward to help them through this. We at Freedom Project offer an online school, Freedom Project Academy, that is still going strong because it's completely online. We have real teachers teaching from their homes all across the country to real kids across the country and in a dozen foreign countries. So Freedom Project Academy, if you have a student in K-12 from kindergarten all the way through high school, take a look at our Judeo-Christian Live online classes for next fall. This is the time to do it. Places are filling up for the fall. Request your free information packet at freedomforschool.com. That's freedomforschool.com. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. And until next time, stay educated, my friends.